Alex Marlow here, editor-in-chief of Breitbart News, here with one of America's best journalists, Andy Ngo, Andy-Ngo.com. He's got a Patreon, he's got a Locals, find him in Post Millennial. He's got a book called Unmasked, which was out, I think it was a year ago, and it was a big hit. So Andy, it's great to have you here on our various platforms. You're at the Turning Point event here, AmericaFest. You're speaking to a younger group of people. Now, one thing that you're very good at is that people attack you with all sorts of various odd attacks that are not based in anything. And you go ahead, you soldier ahead. Speak about the mentality it takes to be a journalist in America reporting on the woke left.
You know, I actually never really thought of myself as brave before, and it was surprising to me when people went up to me and thanked me for my reporting and said I was brave. All I thought I was doing was just presenting the truth. At that time, a few years ago, it was on video. That's what I used to do. I used to go to the protests and riots to capture the footage. And it made me a target of violence many times. It's an old story now. People have known what's happened to me over the last few years in Portland, Oregon, where I was living. I guess it takes a lot of courage to be brave, and I'm not sure if I see it in myself, but for other people, I think when they're willing to stick by their convictions, knowing that they have a lot to risk and to lose, that's something I really admire. In this conference, unfortunately, I don't get the opportunity to attend very many conferences in America now. I'm outside of the US a lot because of threats against me. But here, I mean, there's a certain fire that's driving a lot of young people, and that's encouraging. I think, you know, in comparison to some other places, other countries I've been to, I don't really see that same type of excitement for conservative politics among young people.
Right. So what's different here? Because there is so much hatred of conservative young people. You've experienced it. You have been attacked violently. And it's one of these things where it is designed to maybe not affect you. Maybe you're strong enough that you fight through it. But maybe it's the next person who would want to do what you're doing, would want to emulate your career. And they don't want to do it because they're afraid.
You know, I'm not one to call for every person to be a martyr. And I think it's actually, sometimes I hear people say, go out and get canceled because then you'll be released of all, you know, restrictions. And actually, I think that's reckless. You have to be really strategic about it. And there are certain rules of the game, and it's rigged against people like you and I.
Right. And
so you have to be smart. I would just say, if for people, let's say, who are interested in journalism, if you pursue the truth and that's reflected in your work, people will recognize that, and even your detractors will recognize that. I mean, I think there's a reason why I'm perceived as a big threat to many people on the far left. It's because my work is accurate. You know, I have, for example, my book. It has huge citations on the end, law enforcement sources, official press releases, all that, and of course the importance of video documentation of riots and violence and criminal activities.
But I think that's why you're attacked harder. It's because when you bring the goods, sometimes they have two choices: either ignore you or to try to dismiss you and try to get you canceled, which you've been the subject of a lot of attacks in that regard, as have a lot of other people, particularly on Twitter, which people probably maybe best know you from Twitter. You're a lot of places, but your Twitter account's very powerful. And Twitter's gotten a lot more free lately. I want you to assess the Twitter files and the censorship that maybe you've experienced over the years, and others who do similar things to what you do and I do and use that platform. Talk about it broadly.
What was really disturbing to me about Twitter's content moderation before the regime change is that journalists could be actually punished for reporting the truth. And I'll give a very clear example of that. In 2019, every year there's a day called Trans Day of Remembrance, which is a day where activists say that there's a genocide of trans people in the United States, that it's driven by white supremacy and transphobic fascism and transphobic hate. And I looked into data. You have usually around 3 dozen homicides of trans people. Each one's tragic. I'm not diminishing those deaths. But you compare that to the population size, that's not a genocide. Two, you look at who are the suspects who are alleged or convicted as murderers, and they are overwhelmingly black males. That may be inconvenient truth, it's the truth of the data. I reported that out in 2019, and that was found to be a violation of Twitter's hate speech policy. So I was forced to delete it or not be on the platform. I chose ultimately to delete it.
Was there anything you reported that was opinion, or was it all just fact-based?
Facts. Fact, right. Because it's part of this, well, and also as we've learned through the Twitter files, the rules that are outlined in the terms of service are open to wide interpretation from the Twitter staff, right? And here's another example. Under the prior regimes, and actually I think it's still current policy, dead naming, which is where you say the prior name of some person who's trans. Well, in my reporting, I do crime reporting on people who use aliases, have had name changes, and it's absolutely important in crime reporting to report out if somebody had a prior name, you know? And I've had a violation of that, also it's a dead naming policy. And also the thing around the pronouns as well. So this is what I mean. This is Twitter is a powerful tool for communication information, but it's really actually disturbing to me that you are also compelled to lie.
Yes, you are compelled to lie. And I was noticing how, remember the 5 minutes we talked about stopping Asian hate? First of all, I feels like you were a victim of Asian hate here a couple of times. How can we stop talking about Asian hate? We was just like 20 minutes and then we were done.
Stop Asian hate and any other so-called anti-racism campaigns in the United States are driven only for partisan political reasons. So when it can be blamed on white supremacy or the right, then there's a lot of attention brought onto it. So that, for example, Stop Asian Hate, that started because of the deadly shootings in the Atlanta, the sex spas. And the suspect happened to be a white male, and some of the victims were women of East Asian background. Evidence has not come out to support that he was driven by anti-Asian animus, so that inconvenient narrative sort of just faded away. We saw it again also with the Colorado Springs mass shooting at the gay club. Immediately, the narrative was that this happened because of people like Libs of TikTok, because of people like me, because we are allowed to state, either to report inconvenient truths or to state our opinions on gender ideology. And because of that, we played a role in inspiring the mass shooter. Well, very quickly we learned that this is a trans, non-binary shooter, and there's been no evidence so far that law enforcement have pointed to say that this suspect was driven by an anti-LGBTQ ideology.
Sure. And this happens so often, and yet there's never culpability, there's never accountability, there's never mea culpas, there's never suspensions or punishments of any kind. It just, we all move on to the next hysteria. And so you do most of your reporting, not just on the institutional left, but really on the violent institutional left. Tell me about a couple of things you're talking about right now, you're reporting on right now.
Yeah, so it's really, broadly you could say I actually report on what is cancel culture, but the ultimate conclusion of it, which is political violence, extreme political violence. So outside of Atlanta, there's been an autonomous zone that's been in place since June of last year. This really should have been a bigger story. It's been ignored in the national press. And you've had now this occupation of far-left extremists coming from all across the United States to this autonomous zone so that they can prevent the construction of a law enforcement training facility. Now, there's been a number of arrests over the months, but it escalated in the last 2 weeks with 2 arson attacks on 2 homes that were under construction next to the autonomous zone was burnt to the ground, arson attacks on the street, assaults on law enforcement, and a civilian who made the mistake of driving into the so-called autonomous zone and having his car set on fire with him inside the vehicle. So the Georgia Bureau of Investigation last week raided this autonomous zone / compound. 5 of the suspects have been charged with domestic terrorism, among other felony charges. And this is not a front page story. When you have what is alleged by prosecutors, a felony conspiracy of domestic terrorism in the United States. Yeah, so, you know, a lot of it is an issue with actually the media, even though we can bypass a lot of the gatekeeping through social media. I'm fortunate to have a platform. A lot of people are not on social media, so if they're not plugged into, let's say, places like Breitbart or the Post-Millennial or certain people on social media, you can completely miss out on extremely important stories and therefore be misinformed or disinformed about what's happening in the country.
Are there any broader trends that you're either happy about or concerned about on this beat right now?
Concerned about
or happy about, either way? Are we making progress against this politically violent left? Or do you feel like there are some things that are popping up still disturbing? Maybe it's more of these autonomous zones.
I'm pessimistic about the direction of, I guess, where the United States is going in. And I say that because, yes, we're not having the same type of nightly riots as we saw in 2020, but the networks and strategies that were developed throughout that year remain. And it will only just be a matter of time before there's another George Floyd-like moment to galvanize the left into violence. You know, there hasn't been a systematic dismantling of these networks. With Elon at the helm of Twitter now, there is some change in that some of these violent extremist accounts have been suspended. But, I mean, his involvement with Twitter seems tenuous at best. We don't know whether it's going to be long term. And really, it's a law enforcement matter. And we're seeing over and over, in my opinion, a failure of the federal authorities.
So what would you like to see in the next year or so in terms of the country, America in particular, and really the West in general, starting to deal with the political violence on the left? What are the things you'd like to see happen that maybe you're surprised aren't happening yet?
I think it's really important to build coalitions. And sometimes I wonder if people on the right and left are so wedded to their beliefs that they're not willing to make compromises, and that concerns me. I know it may be unpalatable to give up certain things that are core and principal to one's personal beliefs or religious beliefs, but I mean, I don't really see how the country could come together without that, given you have essentially two sides who offer vastly different pathways for the country. And you either have more polarization or compromise and coming together. And so my frustration with the left is that they've built a coalition not with moderates and center-right people, but rather those on the far left. You know, many Democrats, willingly or not, are actually doing a lot of the propaganda narratives for violent extremists like Antifa, for example, by denying their existence, downplaying their violence, deflecting the violence onto another side.
So do you think, though, that the right, because our coalition does seem to be encompassing really the entire anti-woke universe, is not as doctrinaire, but yet it does feel like there's a lot of values that we mostly agree on that are galvanizing people? I guess I'm optimistic ideologically in terms of what that looks like at a broader societal level. I don't know, but I just feel like ideologically there is progress being made.
I mean, I wonder how one can be optimistic when all of the institutions that are self-replicating for the current and next generations have been taken over and dominated by one side. How do you counter that? I don't even know. I'm not a political strategist. It seems actually I'm quite pessimistic about all of it. I think, just looking at, journalistic institutions, what's happened there. Like, do you really think there's coming back?
Well, not from the institutions need to be repealed or replaced. But I think a lot of the people, I think we're getting through to people. I think you're getting through to a lot of people. I think we're getting through to a lot of people. So, Andy, this will be the last one for today. If people want to support you, what are the best ways they can support your work?
Well, I'm an independent journalist, and so I really lean on people who like my work to support me as well. So going to andy-ngo.com, and there are ways to support me there.
Wonderful. Well, you're an incredible voice, and thanks for being here.